Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters, and we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Today we have a returning guest, and we have Clinton Ignatov with us. He is a writer online in the vein of media ecology. He's got a post out on defaultfriend.substack.com that I wanted to use as a jumping point for this discussion, called Fragmentation of the Self. The changing perception of the self is downstream of the printing press. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine this afternoon. Thank you, David.
So here we are on Zoom, and it'll be on various media that we distribute on. And you posted this on a Substack, and you're trying to get us to pay attention to the printing press in the vein of Marshall McLuhan, right? That if we want to understand the changing perception of the self, you say that some of the postmodern ideology and intersectional theory and so forth are trying to grasp at this, but getting it wrong. But do you think we need to go back to understanding media and how it affects us in the vein of Marshall McLuhan?
Yep, that's exactly right. That's what media ecology is all about. It grew up largely around the same time as what we today call postmodern theory, and traditionally, lately, when people hear postmodern theory, they think of oh, reality isn't real, or we deny that there's any true meta narratives and all this other jargon, right? But I think when you read it, what you realize is it's people trying to grapple with how nothing in our world seems to add up, and how at the same time ourselves don't seem to add up. And so our world, it's hard to make sense of the world, and that's the flip side of saying that we ourselves don't feel integrated or whole so much anymore, and it's harder to find that sense of selfness that stays the same, that isn't just constantly tripping over itself or changing or full of inner contradictions. I think that's a better way of getting at what postmodern theory is trying to get at, and I think that there's some answers in media ecology that are worth talking about and looking at deeper.
So where would you start off here? I mean, you kind of start off looking at classical views of alienation and as it pertains to the laborer, and then you say that that idea of industrialization is what, kind of alienated workers from the end point of their product, of their work. And then you say, well, that's not getting at what's really going on. We have to go back further, right, to the invention of the printing press.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of having a private text that you read, right, that engages, that you engage with in a way that starts to animate your private voice and your internal kind of perspective, as opposed to a shared collective perspective as text would be performed prior to the mass introduction of text on an individual vernacular tongue level, right?
Well said. Yes, that's That's right. Ancient Greek culture grew out of the poems of Homer, right? You had the right culture is carried orally through reciting and memorization and conversations, and the written word, when it's in handwriting, needs to be read so much more slower because you got to decipher someone else's handwriting, right? And so you're often speaking out loud. Most books, when they were being read, right up until the printing press, were being read out loud to a group because it was there weren't a lot of them. They had to be handmade. You were probably making them yourselves, or you were writing down notes. Most of what survives of great thinkers, is the classroom notes that were made by people right in their own handwriting. And these are all forms of social activity, reading aloud, speaking aloud, right? Now, I often think lots of times if I want to figure out what I'm thinking, I have to have a conversation with someone. Even in conversations like this, we'll probably both say things that we weren't expecting or planning to say because within the conversation you draw out different facets
Yeah.
of, of yourself. That's community, collective identity building. Um, but with a with a printed book, those perfect letters, black on white, that are so easy to read that your eyes zip across the page silently, you build an inner voice, this quiet inner thought process. You get used to sitting alone, sitting still, ignoring your body, ignoring your surroundings. You find a private place to sit. You shut out the world. You enter this inner world. And McLuhan thought very strongly that combined with just the power of the alphabet to capture sound through vowels and consonants and whatnot, that collectively created the Western individualistic mind. And the Western individualistic mind was a contemplative, silent, observing thinker who could perceive systems, and you get Newtonian space and Cartesian physics, and you have people watching processes and creating machines and mechanization. And the West, industrialization grew out of this systematizing of our material world.
There's a Christian social philosopher, Rosenstock Jusey. He says that the text, when the Bible becomes with the printed Bible that everybody can have access to, that it brings the Christian experience away from, because he says before that it was kind of like you were a Christian inside church, and then when you came back into your home, you kind of maintained your pagan sensibilities and concerns about ghosts and goblins and so forth, and your pagan traditions. But he said when the text was able to be brought back into the house with the printed text in your own tongue, it was able to start dancing around and kind of invading the home and the private space. And now psalms are being sung in the church, in the family, around the fireplace as they read scripture. And now the text of the biblical text is going to permeate culture on a level that it hasn't permeated, for good or for ill. I'm just saying that's what he says, right?
That's interesting. That makes a lot of sense, actually. I'm no expert, but I understand that would probably explain a lot of differences between Protestantism, especially in America, compared to the much more multifaceted Catholicism with its many structures and more pagan elements, right?
And in Orthodoxy, yeah, I mean, there's just
Mm.
individualism is not as steeped, obviously, in Orthodox church and in countries that have been more influenced by um, traditions that don't have the text inside your home dynamic as fully enmeshed. Let's say
Hmm. Hmm.
that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. There's a great essay by rather famous critical, or I should say, literary critic called Hugh Kenner, who was a student of McLuhan. But he thought that America was founded on the know-how book because it was a pioneer, frontiering. Um, um, well, it was a frontier where your very survival depended on being able to build a cabin before you froze to death in the wintertime, and so the only book you could carry with you was one that you really needed. Very practical
Yeah.
stuff. All right, and so besides your Bible, you need, how to chop wood, how to do this, how to do that, right? All very methodical. You need a book that has 100 cures for all the different ailments you might contract, right? There wasn't much room in your wagon cart for literature as there was
Mhm.
for a very practical know-how sort of
Yeah.
knowledge. And so that sort of shaped the American psyche in a way that results in, say, being able to found a country based on legal documents, very long legal documents with very long clauses with 37, word sentences. It takes a very, very literate, analytical sort of psychology, which you could not possibly have without books,
Yeah.
in order to have the sort of culture of the speeches and the presidential debates and the deliberations over the Constitution and all these other things, which were so integral to the American spirit.
Now, when you have, and I want to go back to the um, kind of the printing press part, but before that, I want to get into, you were talking about individualism, and is there a distinction you would make between like individualism versus, say, like personhood, or like when I look at the gospel text when it talks about, there's a passage that theologian David Bentley Hart mentions where he says he talks about Peter, the disciple of Christ, weeping upon realizing that he has betrayed his master when the cock crows, right? It
Mhm.
says that he weeps, and he points out this is the first time in history that we see a text, especially of this tradition, like concerning itself with the internal sorrow and despair of a illiterate peasant fisherman, right? Like this is such a breakthrough taking place at the time. There weren't texts that had that kind of narrative perspective. What was it about that from a media ecology standpoint? What's going on there that allows that text to create a perspective in which we are concerning ourselves with the emotional internal despair of someone of low status uh, in
Mhm.
in the culture they're in? Like where does
Mhm.
that, how does media ecology help us? Because I know media ecology is talking about the effects of the medium itself as opposed to the text inside the medium, but in this case the
Mhm.
text is revealing that something's happening in history, and my that I think media ecology, I think McLuhan as a Christian would be interested in this topic too. Like why is it that this gospel text is taking a camera perspective of interest in that?
Mhm. Mhm. No, that's a very good entry point, because authorship is generally recognized to have started after the printing press in Europe, and by authorship I mean the practice of ascribing a book to a single mind, and for an author to identify with their work in that intensely personal way. So in France, it was the essayist Montaigne who sort of his writings became famous, and rather than being either a classical book of which most were just reproducing ancient books, and or a general topic book, he sort of pioneered this idea of personal authorship, and you're getting the inside of me, and this is me pouring my heart onto a page. And we take it for granted now that art is self-expressive, or expressions of the artist, or at least a great deal of art is. Maybe not enough art isn't, mind you, but the idea of getting the inside angle on a character is what human interest stories in newspapers and gushy sensationalist biographies and stuff grew up on at the beginning of the 20th century. And so what you can do with words is you can explore inner emotional states. And when the Bible was written, there weren't these literary traditions of romanticism. Um, well, right, there's plenty of poetry. There's lots of poetry and whatnot, but for a historical text, which is what the which is which has become scripture. It's so like we're not used to these symbolic mythological texts which are saying many things at the same time and compressing so much accrued human wisdom into these stories. Right, you're right, there's seldom time for a secondary character to pop his head up and have a little internal monologue, right? Of course, we take for granted that all these people are two-dimensional, are three-dimensional, fully developed people just like us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Individualism is there's so many different definitions of the term because people complain that we in the West here are hyper individualist in the sense that we're all about expressing ourselves or we're selfish or the economic system, you know, tells us to, you know, like say fuck everyone else, I got mine, if you'll pardon my French. Um, Nevertheless, that can also be very, very collectivist. If everyone else is equally as self-interested as you are, then that's you know if you have a self-interested culture, then you're not different from anyone else. That's not individualism in the sense that I mean.
Right.
A culture where everyone is selfish isn't individualist by how I would use the term.
So it's not. So is individualism in this case? I guess what I'm trying to get at is individualism doesn't mean is not synonymous with the interest of the human person, right? You know, this the idea
Mm-hmm.
that the text in the Gospel of Luke I'm referring to, when it
Mm-hmm.
says that, um, you know, in the text that Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and then the cock crows. And
Mm-hmm.
it says, and Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows today, you would deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly.
Mm-hmm.
And David Bentley Hart has famously commented, the theologian, about how, you know, that indicates, um, he says that, David Bentley Hart says, this may perhaps seem a rather unextraordinary episode, albeit a moving one, but
Mm-hmm.
therein lies its peculiar grandeur. To us today, it seems only natural that a narrator should pause to record such an incident and
Mm-hmm.
treat it with certain gravity. But in the days when the Gospels were written, the tears of a common man were not deemed worthy of serious attention. They would have been treated by most writers as, at most, an occasion for mirth. Only the grief of the noble could be tragic or sublime or even fully human. The tears of Peter were therefore indicative of a profound shift in moral imagination and sensibility. Something had become visible that had formerly been hidden from sight. For Christian thought, God had chosen to reveal himself among the least of men and women and
Mm-hmm.
to exalt them to the dignity of his own sons and daughters. And as a consequence, a new vision of the dignity of every soul had entered the consciousness of the Gentile world. So that every soul concept, is that prefiguring what is blossomed with the printing press? You know, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously individualism doesn't necessarily become synonymous with care for every soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I thought so. Christianity was rebellious and it was counterculture, and Jesus's teachings were largely you know, they weren't exactly about immediate gratification or or fitting in and or avoiding, you know, they were all about self-sacrifice more or less.
Right.
It's clear, and that takes an ability to step out of the room, to object when everyone else is going one way, to go a different way. That is the individualism that I'm talking about. And if the writers of the Gospels, you know, seeing as they were, you know, dedicating their lives to spreading the word and being, you know, apostles, it's their insight as people who are constantly running into foreign and alien lands and being the one guy who's trying to tell everyone else that you know they need to change their ways. That's extremely individualistic. That's a very you know, you're not fitting in anywhere in that sense.
Right.
And of course that's what Christianity largely entails, is not fitting in to the collective. And I'm sure that the written word, um, I'm sure that that there's some sort of confluence there between the nature of writing as it was and also the life of Jesus Christ. And you know, the focus
Yeah.
entirely coming out of the Old Testament and Jewish culture, of the emphasis on the word and on writing, right?
Right.
It all, you know, It's definitely a collective force there.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at. Is just, you know, is this a prefigurement of what's to come with individualism, with the printed text, and
Well, well,
how does the, because the text was still limited at that time, and most
right.
people were not literate, and most people
Hmm.
were you know, if they were hearing a text, they were having it orally performed for them to listen to.
Hmm.
Um, uh, so, what force at that time is bringing that individual insight into someone of low status,
Well,
into the media ecology?
well,
What extension of man is taking place? Is it just the collection of the
well, Rome was able to do a lot of their colonizing because they had a technology called the alphabet,
right?
which is like a sound recorder that allows you to record even languages you don't understand. You just write them down phonetically and go translate it later, right? Anybody, any literate Roman and Greek before Rome, or right, people with alphabetic technology, which means you've got a bunch of consonants, but you also have a bunch of vowels to supplement the consonants so that you can write down exactly what you hear, more or less. It's like imagine being the only people in the ancient world with a tape recorder. What you can do with that? Because that's what you're doing. You're capturing human voices and being able to replay them at will just by sounding them out again off the page. And that alone, even though it's mostly oral and spoken, is a very powerful technology which contributed to the ability to write down what someone said and then think about it and then think about it the next day and then come back with a retort or an answer. It creates argument, it creates dialogue of a sort that survives. That's the basis of the Socratic philosophies, is being able to ruminate on. You didn't just if you hear something once, you might forget the gist. You walk away from a conference and you heard a good speech and you think that was a great speech. I wish I hope someone recorded that, because you actually want to hear it again. And with writing, you can hear it again if you took notes. So writing was already a huge step towards creating this individuation.
Okay,
And that was not all of Roman culture, but that was a significant amount.
very. So that makes sense. The alphabetic language is the kind of thing that allows for this this breakthrough in text to
Mm-hmm.
concern itself and record the interior sadness of someone of relatively low status,
Mm-hmm.
and not a nobleman, not a king, not an aristocrat. Of course, his movement put him in high regard, but uh,
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure that he might not have been important if this were some political pamphlet, but we're talking about a book that was written by someone with a, devoted to Christ. And so
right,
the apostles of Christ would have been pretty important to the author, even if they
right,
weren't important to anybody else, I
right.
think, at the time.
But so then we jump ahead back to kind of where you're going with this piece. Is just want to set the table for why we're in the place of alienation today.
Hmm.
We get the print. You said the printing press is where this starts to happen, but why do we get drunk on individuation? Why do we get to the point where we can't have a sense of community together? Because we can look at, for example, I mean, it's a myth in some ways, but the 1950s America,
Hmm.
where people still had community. There was a lot of individualism baked into that. There was a lot of novels and a lot of newspapers and a lot of other media too that are coming on top that might give us a different perspective. But
Hmm.
but you still had a sense of, you had your bowling club and you had your Lions Club or whatever, and you had your church and your gathering place. And when it was 4th of July, everybody was having a cookout together. And that kind of communal structure was still in place that allowed, to some degree, a sense of community and togetherness to still be there, even though it was getting individualistic. Uh,
Well,
so, what's going on? And I mean, we're jumping ahead by a lot to go from the printing press to there, but just trying to build up to where we're at today.
right. An answer, unanswer. It's not going to be my answer, but unanswer is, specific ideologically motivated attacks on the structure of America, let's say, or the structure of community, or our families are under attack. One question I have actually is, sometimes I hear conservative commentators, worry that the nuclear family is under attack, and the nuclear family is, mom and dad and the kids in their house, right?
Yeah.
And the longer historical narrative is that in Europe during the 1800s, the railroad allowed for young men or sometimes women to leave home and go to the cities for a factory job and to make money. And that destroyed the family down to these little alienated units called the nuclear family, because easy mass travel broke up the habit of large households, or living next to all your aunts and uncles in the village of, multiple generations sharing a same house or sharing a same street, right? So the family is a large affair of
Yeah.
dozens of people in a traditional
Cousins, yeah.
sense. And the nuclear
But you
family,
never see the cousins until you get your rap album out there. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden you hear from them.
yeah,
They all come back home at
yeah,
that point.
yeah, exactly. Well, in my family's case, it's if they're the one aunt or uncle who bothers to organize Christmas where and get everyone to travel and find a house, and then we all see each other. And if they skip out one year, then everyone stays scattered across Canada, right? It's right. So it's like the family, the nuclear family, is the end result of fragmented alienation.
Yeah, that's all that was left was the little
That's,
nucleus. You're saying, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, all the free radicals have been stripped away, right? So
Yeah.
yes, this idea of community. Um, um, it's something that was alienating people in the industrial age. Um, when we think back to the 50s, a lot of what we're looking at is actually sort of a nostalgic attempt. We're not looking at the 50s, you and I, when we're watching
Right.
some black and white film with Jimmy Stewart in it. We're looking at the propaganda, which is nostalgic for an age that everyone who was actually living in the 50s also didn't have anymore.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So it's for me being able to think about it in terms of something as concrete as, well, they made trains and then people got on the trains and that tore the family apart, is so much easier, to think about as a reason than some ideological plan by some communist academic or some Soviet to, introduce propaganda to do that, right? It's like there are material reasons first and foremost. And for McLuhan, all media are, like, all material artifacts we make are media. Roads are media. The highway system is media, right? All these things have the content of the cars, but the media itself changes the shape of America, right? Look at the actual ground of this stuff. Um, yeah, our sense of community is built up more and more around things that we share in common through mediated images, through icons, more
Yeah.
or less, through fandoms, and if you want to, when you live in a city, if you're not going to talk about the weather, what else have you got in common with your coworkers or your associates or the guys at a bar, right? Hopefully, you both watch the same sport. You can talk about that for 20 minutes, right? But it's all media, right?
Yeah.
They're
The
all.
media is shaping, but it's not just the text of the media, like, oh, did you see what they did today about that
Mm,
scandal?
hmm
It's the media itself, right? That
hmm
McLuhan's getting at is shaping our senses, amplifying some, and
hmm
helping us have memory, retrieval, all these different things. And it's all swarming around us. And you're saying, and what's interesting in the article is you say we need to learn how to get exhaustively granular about the facts of each of these things.
hmm
How can one do that? And how is one to, is that something that only the elite, some kind of new elite will emerge in Twitter and so, or something, and
Well,
figure out how to get really intelligent about a lot of facts and
yeah,
specific?
people who seem to be smart and who seem to have a good track record for knowing what's going on, a lot of them have worked in tech, let's say, and that gives them sort of insight about how the latest technology works. That gives
Yeah.
them insight about media, right? Implicitly, right? Lots of musicians need to be very technically minded to be aware of, just to work their equipment, to know what goes into a modern song, how to create an environment with your music, especially if you're a DJ and you've got a room full of people and you're creating this aesthetic texture to make everyone move to when you're you're feeling the room, right? But you're doing it through your shaping, your modulation of the environment that everyone's in. And the people who bring a music to the event, they do it best when they're invisible, right? If you notice the DJ, you either hope that they're so good that you're impressed, or they're screwing it up. right right so much of our world, our environment, is somewhere, but behind a curtain there's an expert who knows how to create and shape this environment. All of our shopping malls are designed by people who know to make the angles weird and never 90 degrees, so that you get lost and wander for a while and see some other part of the mall that you wouldn't have gone through if you couldn't, like, if there weren't blind corners everywhere, right? Right, there's psychology behind everything, where the food is in the supermarket. That if you don't know, if you don't read about it, if you don't understand the tricks, why you have to walk to the far corner past everything else just to get the milk,
Yeah.
right. Our total environment is almost like set up to psychologically program us, and that's true in the material world, and that's true in why it is you can't just go onto Netflix and see all the shows listed from A to Z in a giant list. If you could do that,
Does that mean someone's saintly or dumb when you go into a grocery store and the milk and all the things you need are right at the front?
oh yeah, they're saintly, but they're not. They're they're running themselves out of business. Yeah, yeah.
Can one be a saint and have success in the business? That's an interesting question.
Well, I think the saints in the world are the ones who do activist work, who then say, "I hope in 20 years I can quit and I don't have to do this anymore because the problem will have been solved."
Yeah,
The ones who want to solve the problem and then leave and then go get a different life.
yeah.
Activists who are fighting a cause for their entire life and it's not fixed yet, you start questioning.
Do you see your work as activist work in the sense of trying to inform the public of the effects of media on us?
In a sense, because what I like about McLuhan so much is that he uses language no one else would use to talk about the things everyone else is talking about. And I do believe that social construction is a real phenomenon which sociologists and postmodernists and critical theorists rightly understand and
Yeah,
talk about. The words we use to describe a situation do shape so much of our perceptions of them. Like, for instance, and when we don't acknowledge why we use language, we can take it too literally, or it can become like all of our thoughts can become propositional, which means logical, and we get too logical and we can't think outside the terms and be poetic and find new angles. So I'll give you an example. We talk a lot about misinformation, and the most frequent metaphor we use is that of, virology, viruses, right? And misinformation is spreading, right? An idea has gone viral. We need
yeah,
to inoculate people against bad ideas, right? There's a specific medicine analogy being made with actual viruses, but we look to Richard Dawkins and his meme theory, right? Oh, you got memes which are spreading around, right? And we're stuck in this metaphor of thinking of idea as this bug or this germ that we're coughing onto each other, right? And you're going to catch a bad idea like you catch a cold. It's a useful metaphor to an extent, but if it's the only language you have to talk about it, you're never going to be able to escape that framework, that structure. That's
yeah.
what a actual social structure is to me, and those are the sort of things which rightly ought to be deconstructed, so to speak. But when you have a million
With the what
universities
intention? Just to see how it works, or to build something better?
to oh, so one hopes to build something better, but sometimes, right?
What would be a good metaphor framework for memes and ideas that would be better than
Mhm,
viral language about
mhm,
ideas?
mhm. I like to think of two people communicating as two people building a shared sense of something that's outside of the both of them. So David, I haven't asked you about yourself, about how old you are, what you do, or what your astrology sign is. Right? We're not talking about each other to each other, and I'm not asking you questions. So you and I are talking about something outside of the both of us: the alphabet, literature, information, culture. But I'm learning a lot about you by talking to you about things that are not either one of ourselves.
Yeah,
Right? Individualism is about being able to enter into a collective shared space with other people, but still hold on to what makes you you, and not just fall into and lose yourself, right? You need to be able to talk yourself out of anything you talk yourself into, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's what real individualism is for me. And where it goes wrong is where we think of ourselves as a pile of labels that will make us easily more recognizable, or that we can say to someone else as, so that they see us straight away. I'm going to cover myself in labels so that you know who I am straight away. Right. Well, I'm not telling you who I am when I do that. I'm telling you who I am when you catch me in a lie, or when you see me stumble, or when you see me do something good. That's when I'm telling you who I am. Right. So us as individuals, we have to recognize each other not for how we want to be seen or the image we're trying to make for ourselves, but through the world that we are coming to share together, to see and perceive together. And you and I can point to something. Hey, you see that? Yeah, I see that. Did you notice this? Yes. And we're talking about the world outside of ourselves. That's that's what communication is to me, and it's got nothing to do with
Yeah.
sharing information like a little box of facts that I put in an envelope and hand to you. Right? That's not what. That's that's what sharing. That's what communication is.
Yeah. I agree. Um, is there a way in which McLuhan's work can become another label, though, or another totalizing ideology
Oh, sure.
that kind of? So how do you check even that? I mean, how do you? Because it
Mm-hmm.
feels like people. It's almost endless. You know what I mean in terms of the constant self awareness and self
Yeah. Well,
ability to
I have to
do
give.
something, but also to put it away and say maybe this isn't the end all be all. And
Well,
I have struggled. I've developed an audience about mimetic theory and Rene Girard's work, and I've had to learn in my mind to say, okay, this seems so rich and so true, but also it can't say everything, and I don't have to make it say everything. But it's a fun tool, and I
mm-hmm.
play with the tool when I need it, and hopefully it works. And
Mm-hmm.
but it's also you have to kind of keep it in that
Yeah.
realm.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm prone to sometimes being too focused on the things that I like, or that seem to give me all the answers, right? Um, Mimetic theory is interesting because it's sort of what I've read. It's all so focused on human and human interaction, but you know, Miley Cyrus said that she learned how to sing listening to car alarms go off in her neighborhood. Right? Industrial music came out of Detroit, which is factory town, which is people moving to the sound of giant industrial machines around them all day.
Yeah,
Right? We are just as mimetic to our inanimate object and to nature. Right? The cycles of the moon,
yeah, I
right?
agree
The
with that.
cycles of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
day, right? We are mimetic to everything, and that's another
Yeah.
way of looking at extensions of man.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover. I think that's what I was starting to push you towards when we first met,
Mm,
and maybe there's more that we can develop over time in learning
hmm
how they cross over. Um, you
um,
say in your article the paranoid schizophrenics who are terrified of things nobody can see have the correct idea but lack the words or concepts to think through the real causes.
hmm
Um,
hmm
our crisis today is a lack of sufficient breadth of encyclopedic learning to properly explain and justify our true perceptions. So, so again, how do we unpack what you're saying there with this article?
All right. The capacity to find new analogies for things is one of perception. Um, so when I'm looking for something else, some other language, the trap I don't want to fall in is using the same words that everyone else is. So I refuse to say, so, social media, or talk about viral information, or use all the political buzzwords, which are the currency of tribal affiliation in politics today. If I'm going to talk about an issue, I'm going to try to speak about it in terms that are fresh. I'm not making up new words. I'm not asking you to learn some new concept, right? And the thing is, up until only a couple decades ago, if you were going to look up a fact or learn something or write a paper, you had to find those facts in a book. And so you would have to read a lot of stuff that you weren't looking for to find what you were looking for, flipping through the book. And you were accidentally learning a whole bunch of interesting stuff you didn't plan on, or a bunch of boring stuff that you didn't even care about, that you pick up. The inability to find information quickly and easily naturally gave everyone a far wider breadth of accidental learning because you had to go hunting. You had to go hunting for information. And right? I've read so many books just trying to find one thing, and I learned all these other things that I didn't know I was going to find, and then I found interesting I didn't know, right? And so my world is changing with all the stuff I wasn't looking for. And the efficiencies of algorithms and search engines to help you find exactly what you want alone, absent all the so-called distractions or noise. Oh, I hate the idea of there being noise in the signal. Nothing is noise. You just don't know why you might want to pay attention to that yet. There is no noise, right? Um, yeah, that for me, uh, I is important. And you know what? I sort of take a lot of time for myself. I've cut back on a lot of my responsibilities to give myself time to get lost in books and studies, and that's right. And I miss out on lots of other stuff because of that. But I feel like if you're gonna spending time accidentally learning stuff, reading books about subjects you've never read before, um, is a way to find things to connect with other people on, to connect with things in their language. That's my like number one most practical tip would be stop trying to save yourself time looking up facts. Read long stuff. Go accidentally learn something. That's most of what my technique is. Now it's alienating. And the paranoid schizophrenic that I write about is someone who does have a real sense that something's messed up and no one's talking about why properly.
Right.
And I think smartphones are an absolutely devastating technology to unleash. It's like all the distractions and enticements of a casino in your pocket. Um, uh, Children who should be learning how their body works and learning how physical reality works, doing things like cutting vegetables in the kitchen with mom or dad so that they can hold a knife and learn to not slice themselves, and they can learn pressure, they can learn how to work their hands, are pawing away at a touch screen. Doesn't care how hard you press, has no physical features. They're not learning how their muscles work. They're not learning how to attenuate. You take rough and tumble play away from the playground, and kids aren't, playing Red Rover and tackling each other. All right, you're playing very formal, organized sports. But you, in doing that, you're not learning the breadth of scope of your body. My dad always said that the best way to learn how to drive is to take a car to an abandoned parking lot and go bomb around and try to flip it over. Go push it to the max. And then when you get used to doing that, all the regular driving you're doing day to day will be easy by comparison because you know the limits and the thresholds of pushing your automobile. You learned that car at its extreme state, right? You played around with it. And that's what we need to do with our bodies somewhat. And yes, you can hurt yourself. Yes, you can break your bones. Yes, you probably will. But embodiment, it's the same thing with books. Go read things that are above your grade level. Go push yourself to failure state. That's how exercise works. Avoiding that is you're losing the contours, the self-awareness of what you're capable of, and other people will also not be able to see what you're capable of. Like there's all these domains that we could be playing around in that we're not for our sake of our comfort or our ease or all these other things.
Yeah, that's um, has a lot of food for thought there. Is that a good analogy too, or should we get rid of that one?
Food for thought. The brain has a stomach. That's not bad.
We can
I
keep
don't see anything wrong with that one.
man is what he eats. Right? That's the statement.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So food for thought, right? I think that's not a little Cartesian though, right? I think therefore I am, right? Uh-oh.
Mm,
Uh-oh.
that's true. That's true. I wonder, you know, you're sort of getting into fuel, for
Yeah.
instance. Yeah, yeah. I wonder what people who lived for so long thinking that they actually were ashes and dust, you know, how 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 they felt about the lowliness of the body, right? Well, that's the thing. That's what science is constantly doing, is upending our long held wisdom.
What
So these metaphors, like when Darwin told everyone that we're all actually just apes, hairless apes wearing clothes, pretending to be something, but you're all descended from a bunch of animals, right? That was horrible. People were fainting at the thought, right? No, 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 right?
uh what it, does that explain the 90s? There was a fascination with extreme sports and the X factor. Is that what you're talking
Sure.
about? Doing physical things like that? Why was the 90s doing that? Was it because the internet was coming about?
Yeah.
They were
Actually,
reacting to it with extreme sports.
I think so. I think people um um who are losing their sense of embodiment end up looking for it in the most direct, raw, sensory way. And
Does that
so,
mean Tony Hawk, the video game, won and sucked them back into the internet world of computer gaming?
hey, yeah, it's funny.
They
I
tried it in real life for a few years and they found it a lot easier with air conditioning and Mountain Dew in their couch.
some of my, some of my most prolific video gamer friends were skateboarders who fucked up or messed up their knees so badly that they couldn't go back to it. Right? It's like, well, I can't do skateboarding anymore. What am I gonna do, right? It's interesting how yeah, I think all this search for extreme and pushing the human body to the limit, um, I think that's compensation for when people realize that they are out of touch or
Yeah,
out of shape. And of course, you're spectating, right? Um, uh, and also, there's lots of so it's also just the advanced stages of psychology of turning everything into a science and a competition. Um, or everything needing to be a television show. You have 100 channels on cable in the 90s for the first time, or satellite TV now. What the hell are you going to put on there, right?
yeah. The
But
Golf Channel.
yeah, yeah. I remember, it's funny because that branding also went into stuff like yogurt, like extreme yogurt. Yeah, shoot my yogurt down my throat while I'm on my skateboard, right? Well, like it was just over the top. and and I think there's something about feeling like you're getting lost in the arena of information, which was just beginning to swallow culture.
Yeah,
Um, that just makes people want to scramble back into feeling something.
yeah. What about like does media ecology help explain the decline in Pizza Hut quality from the 90s till now? You know what I mean? In terms of like, it just feels like you said that there's this alienation from meat space world and versus, internet world or whatever, virtual reality. And you go into these things that
Yeah,
obviously you can always make the thing, oh, well, nostalgia is clouding your judgment about what was going on. But
yeah.
it does seem like there's also accountants involved at the very least, cutting
Mhm.
those costs at the corporate level and a lack of belief in the people's society animating the ingredient decline.
Yeah, the calculations necessary to make any process more efficient. There's a lot of math involved. And around 1890, this guy named Hollerith created this punch card machine to add up the votes. The American census of like 1892 or something like this. And then basically this technology became the foundation of IBM, which is all just punch cards, math, but it's all mechanical. And the ability to do math at speed allowed accounting and specialization and planned economics to become viable for the first time. And companies could say, hey, here's this scenario or that scenario or that scenario. We ran the numbers
Yeah.
very efficiently, and
And we
computers can do that.
slowly reduce the cheese quality by
And the tests and
0.001%.
the test marketing studies, yeah, like no one complained out of our sample of 200 people, so let's slowly eke it in, and yeah, it shouldn't make a negligible effect. Yes, efficiencies at every
The
level.
rate of mental damage done by the increase in seed oils, the general audience that consumes our food will
Mhm.
not know the difference by the time our cost cutting measures are completed.
Yeah, exactly,
Something
exactly.
like that. Huh?
And I mean, this is what postmodernists are saying when they say reality is going away. Like, yes, you bought something, and yes, the reason it breaks the day after the warranty expires wasn't an accident.
Yeah.
It's because somewhere before you got that thing, there was the perfect science behind figuring out how thick to make the plastic and what sort, right? Like industrial design is a job. The the qualities and the strengths of every material used for every single
Yeah.
thing that you buy that came out of a factory line. There was some
Yeah.
engineer who knew exactly how strong it was and how long it would last and how much it would cost, and they found the perfect balance point. And so everything in your house, yes, it may technically be a physical object, but it's software. It's computer software. It came out of a grid of numbers by design. And if my grandfather was a carpenter and he built desks and beds and did very nice, fine, granular work, and he would use oak and all these wonderful woods. I think it's gonna last forever. It's gonna freaking last forever. It's lasted this long. It's gonna last another 100 years because it's by today's standards over engineered, right? In a modern efficiency mindset, you're basically wasting materials if you build something to last.
Yeah.
And the accounting department is saying, well, they're never Crockpot. No, not Crockpot. The Instant Pot. That company apparently just went insolvent because the Instant Pots are too good and everyone only needs one and it's lasted 15 years and no one's buying another one and they tried to diversify into other things and they couldn't do it. But
Yeah.
you make your product too good, you go out of business. You can't survive.
That's a good thing, though. I mean, make your money, get out, and go do something good. Just don't
Yeah.
destroy
Yeah. Oh,
society.
yeah.
What a novel concept, right? You know what I mean?
Amazing. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Like
exactly.
what a novel. Think about that. Is that? I mean, let's talk about media ecology. What a novel concept. The idea of starting a business to last for a time to
Mhm.
solve a problem. Like you said, activism. What? No,
Yeah.
everything should be like that. It
Yeah.
solves a problem, and at some point, it's probably going to have a sunset, and you don't try to like manipulate people and degrade society as a way to keep your garbage going. Like General Electric, they got into making money off of wars and stuff.
Hmm.
Like, why don't you just go make an oven? I mean,
Yeah.
why do you have to do all this?
Yeah. Well, right. Again, we've moved so far into the abstract and into the media content that your brand name is valuable to whoever you're going to sell the rights to slap your label onto. After
Yeah.
you leave, you're not going to let your valuable brand name with all this mind share already established in the
Have
market.
you already worked out the rights to an AI to keep your work going? With our
Uh,
media ecology?
I'm sure someone will rip me off, but no, no, they're certainly not getting my letter of
Good.
permission. Damn
Yeah.
straight. Yeah.
You're not going to submit to the AI board, right?
Hell no. Hell no. My God. I mean,
Tell,
we're really doing ourselves a disservice where we think it's easier. Okay, so it's easier to go build a computer to do our thinking for us than to become better thinkers, right? Or or it's easier to, run off into the woods and like live off the land and farm your own chickens. It feels like that's the easier solution than it is to, stick around and better yourselves and help and repair something that's going on in the society that you live in. And that's harder to do because when you live in a society, generally most people feel like they're part of their society. And to individuate is more like it's like going on a spirit journey and going through some dark night of the soul and then reinventing yourself or finding yourself again, and then sometimes you don't even like society anymore, right? People go through personal journeys of reinvention, or they have spiritual awakenings, or all these things, or some people use psychotropic drugs to the same end, right? Our relation to our culture and our societies and even our families, um, it's like a constant renewal. It's a constant pattern of questioning, but also, loving and understanding, and not becoming a solipsist broken off from everyone else, or a narcissist who just demands everyone else treat you the way you think you should be treated, or see you as who you say you are,
Yeah.
right? Identity is the hardest thing that we can grapple with, but it's the basis for us being the sort of people who can keep civilization going.
Yeah.
Like, we have to figure out enough of how to be stable, predictable, sociable, reliable human beings, so that then we can do the work that needs to be done. But if you never get past the stage of at least becoming half self-sufficient but friendly, then you end up with a planet full of narcissists and trauma victims,
Yeah.
and you're not going to build a society on that.
Yeah. Do you think that the AI thing is demons? That's what some people have been telling me. A lot of
It's a
people ask me questions about
Yeah.
AI.
I think that cuts very close to something that we intuitively know about psychology. As a metaphor, I will say that it's a metaphor, but it's not too distant, because I imagine, when people are talking about demons before modern science, they're describing psychology, right? If I give you the evil eye, or if I see people, venerating a graven object, and I see what it's doing to them, and I see what it's doing to their psychology, and I call it, that they've been possessed by a demon, right? I mean, memetics, is sort of a scientific way of approaching the phenomenon in a more palatable language.
Sure.
But there's a but you know, I don't think demons is a bad metaphor, so long as you don't reason from it literally, according to rules from, right, as though it were some sort of scientific structure that was as, internally consistent as, say, like chemistry or trigonometry or something, right? It's when we take a metaphor like like uh, information, uh, as a virus, or as people's changing identities as having to do with possession, right? When we think of these things, um, we're not being logical in the sense where you can add up propositions: if this, then that, then this, then that, right? Socrates spent and the Socratic philosophers spent a whole lot of time trying to figure out, when is a chair a chair, and a cat is an animal, but not all animals are cats, and trying to figure out the logic of things. And we can't build a logical system where you can abstractly rationalize on everything. So much of what we say and do is metaphors. And so I don't want to encourage, looking at anybody in our society as being literally possessed by demons. I also think we ought to notice that so much of our culture is mediated through fandoms, and through the worship of celebrities as icons, and through emulation, and through mimesis, and that we often don't think through our own thoughts, and we just parrot talking points that we've heard. Sometimes you get into an argument with someone, and they repeat a line you've heard on the radio a million times. You go, I know where you got that. That's wrong. You're just an ideological puppet possessed by ideology, right? You need an exorcist, but that doesn't mean he literally needs an exorcist. It doesn't mean she's literally possessed. It means that, we are extending ourselves into this larger environment, which is largely out of our control, and it is getting into us. And our ability to individuate from it and come back again and enter into it and accept the influences sometimes and reject other premises for our own reasons is a lifelong skill of constantly going meta, or breaking the frame,
That
or
just seems like it's always going to be a very small amount of people who will be able to do that, though. Right?
if you got to get to work, and then you got all these obligations, and you don't have time for this contemplative philosopher thought. Like, that is what intellectuals are for, is to do the thinking for everyone
No,
else.
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying. So what?
Yeah.
But what can, if it's always going to be a small amount of people who have that ability to do self awareness?
Those,
What can they do for the rest of society?
those small amount of people need to um, need to read Julian Benda's Le Trésor de Clerc, which is a book whose English title is The Betrayal of the Intellectuals. Now, I'm not saying he's all right, but the basic premise is, if there's only going to be a few smart people who know what's going on, then they have sort of a calling, a devotional, reason for, being very careful and walking on eggshells and not selling out their influence to craven bullshit and not sullying what intellectualism and not being, career academics who, go power tripping or pushing ideologies. Like the smart people in the room have to be respectable and worthy of the
Yeah.
respect that they receive from people who are relying on them to be smart.
Yeah.
Science did itself a horrible disservice by mangling an atrocious PR campaign with the COVID stuff. I'm not asking what anyone's opinion is. They were horribly bad at the PR, and they lost a bunch of people's trust, and it's their own goddamn fault. These people whose job it is to know this stuff better than everyone else. Lots of them sold out for money. Lots of them were too scared to say anything. The ones who spoke up got booted out, right? Right? Like everyone picked a team and then played these dirty tactic games of tribalism and PR and it turned off everyone as an example of exact right. But what's the good thing to do? Is this strange self-sacrificing, right? Do we expect our intellectuals to stand up against the tide of whatever is going on as well, right? It's if for me, if I'm smart, it's because I of the way that I speak and I use words to try and as I put in this paper, you're reading. You have to be able to talk to people and maybe show them that they're wrong or they're mistaken about something in a way which might even embarrass them or make them sheepish or something, but in a way that eventually they'll thank you for. Like, okay, I was wrong. And that means not personally insulting them or not going on these, like, and that calls for humility and right, humility and all these virtues which religion has taught us are virtues, or right, like all these things you're supposed to cultivate about yourself to be a leader, right, or to be believable, to be trustworthy, tell the truth, all these things that Jordan Peterson makes money preaching at sold out auditoriums, right, is this basic stuff derived in tradition that we've always known, right?
Right.
Um, and as exemplars, not everyone needs to be, smart all day, but the people who are smart need to be doing their job, not alienating themselves and holding them up like monks cloistered away from the world, not trying to escape the world, going into the world and learning to live in the world on the world's terms.
Yeah. I like the way you said, kind of a fun little point you put in there in the article. You said different media affect our senses differently and provide different groundings for our discarnate being. But
Mm-hmm.
really, there's only ever you here and now staring at words on a screen, silently sliding your eye over them. That's a physical object you're staring at, not a virtual document or text. There is no text, and I am not here. I like that. That's a nice thing to say.
Mm-hmm. It's
Because you're trying to help people understand that their whole life is made up of this kind of illusion that they're suspending disbelief.
mm-hmm.
Like, because I think what you're trying to say there, and you do say it, is you say that you talk about how, you used to have like the theater that was very elaborate and beautiful. And when you went in there, you knew you were going to go into a fanciful world. And then the newspaper puts that theatrical world all up in our heads every time without any clear demarcation lines as to where their fantasy experiences end and begin. And then
Mm-hmm.
when everybody else is walking around spreading that narrative that they read from the newspaper too, and now it's online, so it's even more immersive and more in your face. And we're all in these kind of theatrical experiences that are not clearly delineated as such,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore, it's
Mm-hmm.
just we're constantly bumping into each other in these elaborate kind of theatrical movie like experiences, right? And so you're
Yeah,
saying, hey, look, I'm not here, but in some sense it can only go so far because you kind of are there, right? In some ways, right? You're the spirit.
yeah, that's the thing. So if I- if you're watching a TV show and I walk into the room and I say, that's all fictional, right? Those are just actors. This isn't really happening. You're gonna
Yeah.
say, yeah, no shit, of course. But then you're gonna go back to talking about the story as though it's real people, and you're gonna go right back to talking about the things as though they're really happening. You go right back to feeling the character arcs as though they're really happening, and the times where we're explicit about the real nature of what's actually materially going on are so few. and far between. That the way we talk all the time is about as if these things were true and they were real, right? Oh, I felt so good giving money to this charity. Well, charities all just rip you off, right? The thing is, it's so easy to be cynical when you feel like I know what's real and everyone else is a sheep blindly following along and none of their words make sense. And then this is the most dangerous, because you're on your own, you're alienated from everyone else, right? And you feel smarter than everyone else, or you feel more knowledgeable, and it's a very dangerous situation to be moving forward in, because at the end of the day you want to be able to fit in and just in a room and then do what you can when you can, and otherwise get along with people, because in a city you're surrounded by people all the time. You have to work with them and live with them and put up with the differences and swallow a lot of crap, and sometimes you have to be the shutting the heck up you want to see in the world. You wish everyone else would shut up. Well, something right, right.
So is one of the key tactics to helping you have community in this incarnate media world to try to limit your exposure to all these different media as much as you can, or to try to just
Mm-hmm.
not, because there's a way in which you could
Mm-hmm.
live in New York City and not look at any news and not look at your smartphone, or not.
That's
I mean, there's even in that media bubble world, you could really still disentangle yourself from a lot of it and just kind of
yeah,
at least be kind of slightly thinned out
yeah.
from it.
Well, I can describe my own. Like I had a computer in my room from a young age, and I was online all the time, and I was neglecting socialization. I wasn't getting out, but I would listen to music all the time, and be expressing myself through the music that I liked and that I played. Right, the websites I went to, the TV shows I watched, and the movies. I've seen hundreds of movies. Strange European ones, old ones people have never seen before. Right, I lived in media. And what that meant was there's only 24 hours in a day. You got to sleep at least 6 or 8 of them. So if all your time is spent with headphones blocking out everyone else on the bus or on the street, speed walking past people, then if you're that guy, and I was that guy, right? Then yeah, radical shift necessary.
So
I
was
don't.
Marshall McLuhan like discovering AA for you?
It was
Yeah.
like stop everything, purge. Right. I only watch TV or movies socially now.
So
Never
Marshall
myself.
McLuhan met you in the bar where you were, and he said, "Hey, you
Eh,
see this text reading you? I'm not here, and I'm going to show
I'm
you how
not
to get out of
here.
here too."
Oh,
And you're
he
like,
spoke to me.
"Whoa."
Yeah, it was like something from a different universe channeling through the pages. I was reading it and it was like, there's something here and it's so important. I don't understand it yet. And understanding it meant going to learn what it was like to not drown out your thoughts in media 24/7, right? Go
Yeah.
walk down the street and just hear the background noises and the half-heard conversations on the bus and talk to people that you're not comfortable talking to, and go
Mhm.
make right. Like, it's just basic stuff that kids can do, but kids can now avoid them too if it's too awkward and too confrontational. And we give kids places to avoid awkwardness and avoid confrontation. And we're having more and more people who are getting used to, just not developing an embodied relationship to the world or other people, and giving them the easy distraction of another sensational media experience. Media has to be sensational, has to move you. If you read a book about there's a screenwriting, you can't have any scenes in the movie where the daughter's at the dinner table saying, "I've decided to go to college," and the parents go, "Oh, that's nice, dear. That's wonderful." It's always got to be, "I decided to go to college." No, we need you here to take care of your brother. You can't tell me what to do. Like every single, there's no scene that isn't the absolute maximally milked, dramatic, moving, passionate thing, or it gets cut. There is no mundanity. There is no day-to-day life whatsoever. Movies are saturated fat and sugar for your sense of feeling something all the time. That's the real Oscar winner, right? And that's
Yeah.
music, right? If you're listening to a slow song, it's because it's building up to a great ending, right? If everything has to be about feeling something all the time. And when media is our primary way of modulating our sensations, our feelings, it's, and walking through the reality of the world because you forgot your headphones and you're walking down the street is boring and gray and awful, then you're doing something wrong. If you can't just be at peace, alone, in solitude, and quiet, maybe with a book, maybe even with a boring one that you're reading because you have to read, not because you want to read it, right? If you can't take the time to like not try to experience maximal sensation gluttony, whatever you want to call it, yeah, cut out the media, go cold turkey, absolutely.
And then get to cave painting eventually. You're going to have to get back to that one if because
Mm.
if you keep reading novels, that's not going to.
You just regress further and further back. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. You might go feral for a while.
Yeah, you can imagine. You ever seen the Cave of Forgotten Dreams by Werner Herzog, where he shows the different ancient cave paintings that are like 100,000 years old, and he's in France, and he films these, and he shows the lighting with the torch light, and it looks like buffalo running across the. You would like that
Oh yeah, no, that's
as
beautiful. That's
meteorology, yeah.
yes, yes. Because cave paintings are not. They're not a painting in a frame. And you're right. They weren't. They
They're
if you're in a
animation.
dark cave, you can't see them unless you bring your own light source. And if you bring your
Yeah,
own light source, it's flickering and moving. It's a wonderful dynamic. It's got to have been it probably still is an absolute acid trip.
yeah.
So
It
the
was in
cave.
theaters, and I went to see it in theaters. It's worth it. It was worth seeing in theaters because you see, he's got this beautiful music, and he just zooms right up in on
Hmm.
these little buffalo and cave lions, and they're moving, and this
Hmm.
is what were they dreaming, and all these
Hmm.
things. So
No, see, that's a full sensory experience. It's tactile. It moves,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah. That's
tactile's touch.
touch.
So
Yes,
how
you
do you,
see.
how is so how does explain how does that touch?
There's well, I find kinesthetics, which is movement, to be bound up in touch.
Are you when you talk about because McLuhan talks about TV as tactile, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
so is that saying so that means cinema would be too, right? And so that means that
Mhm.
are you guys getting into, well, not necessarily intentionally, but does that go with like mirror neurons when you watch someone running and they hit their knee? Mirror neurons are showing that we experience a similar sensation in our neural pathways related to what it would be like if we were getting hit in the knee right there.
Yeah, yes, yes, to a degree. It's
We
it's
mirror the experiences of physical sensations that we see and observe. Like if you see someone
yes.
getting chainsawed in a visceral way or something, you're going to viscerally feel that. And that's what you mean by
Yeah,
tactile. I
yeah.
mean, that's really easy ones, but
When you see in a movie when someone like breaks their nail and it goes flips up or something and you go
yeah,
and you freak
yeah,
out, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
stuff
that's
like that.
tactile in a more obvious way, right?
Yes, yes, it is. It's see, of course, McLuhan had to go use words his own way just to make you question your own language. So for him, he saw the Western world that was built on books, the Gutenberg press, as being constituted mostly as visual space, and visual space is the detached eye, silently watching what's going on and seeing the connections between everything. And he thought that when books became obsolete, which doesn't mean they go away. There's more books than anything. We use them for wallpaper instead of actually read them so much, right? Um, um, when books became obsolete, we were entering into acoustic space, and if you think about it, your ears, um, you know, they hear from all around your body, and sounds come and go, and you don't right that they're all around you and they don't last the way a picture lasts. If you stare at a picture for an hour, you can keep examining it, but if you hear something and you forget what was said, right, it's lost to you again. It comes and goes. And acoustic space is the world we were entering of things always changing and coming and going and popping in and out of existence, and it's all around us. It's our total environment. You can't step back and get distance from it. And so the ear and the eye, he got a lot of this from the artist Wyndham Lewis and lots of other artists who were trying to break down our sense of space And how do the Chinese consider space? How do the Westerners consider space? Right? We got these different paradigms for how the world we think we exist in works. Scientists, especially positive science, like positivism was the name of the post Enlightenment science that tried to come up with the rules for everything. Right? Okay, Isaac Newton has figured out physics for now and for all time. Physics is done. We know the rules of how physics works, right? We just have to define the rules of how biology works. We have to define the rules of how psychology works, and then science will be over. There'll be nothing left to do because we've created this system. We've found the perfect system to explain everything, and we're done. And so scientific positivism kind of died out 100 years ago when things got really freaky with modernism and quantum physics and relativity. And what do you mean light? And then Picasso was painting weird stuff. And then we got all these crazy cults, of politics and fascism. And it's like, holy crap, we just lost touch with reality. We were almost done building reality in our visual space scientific way. And then it all fell apart. What the hell happened, right? Mathematics got weird. So we're entering acoustic space, the strange, weird, psychedelic trip of the electric world where things can happen without physical causality anymore because radio waves can make a thing can talk to the other side of the planet instantly. And if you're escaping a burglary and you hop on a train, there could be police at the next stop waiting to arrest you because the telegraph allowed the police department to beat the speed of light and get to you right. You were escaping, right? It was easy to escape on a train for all of the heists of all of history until about 170 years ago. And suddenly, train heists and highway robbery plummeted because police could just coordinate and catch you on the other end of your escape.
Yeah.
Right? That's a very tangible, fundamental breakdown of how the physical world used to work.
Yeah.
Like you used to be able to gamble on a horse race if the results hadn't come in yet. You could gamble on a horse race that finished 2 days ago if the results hadn't come in, right? But
Yeah.
the Telegraph allowed people to cheat at gambling, and now all gambling on sports events has to be live because obviously yeah, like all the rules of all of our structures of social structures had to change when electricity made communication instantaneous, and our relation to the physical world changed completely. So that was acoustic space. And tactility is just being in touch with all the parts of space, touch and release, right? It's not connected because you can let go. You can touch things and let go again, and touch things and let go again. That's what our bodies do. We have an idea and we fit it, and then we drop it and find a new idea. That's what tactility was for McLuhan.
Okay. So how do we get an incarnational media landscape? You keep talking about disincarnate.
Well, this is where I said that's a physical object you're looking at, not your computer screen.
Right.
Right? If you're listening to this in your car over the radio, then you're thinking that you're listening to Clinton and David have a conversation, but actually you're hearing the drum in your speaker vibrate because of a copper wire using electromagnetism to make the speaker diaphragm wibble and wobble in a way analogous to a human voice. Right? You're hearing an analogy of the sound waves of Clinton and David talking, right? Like being more in touch with the actual underlying media means that you're in your car listening to a speaker right now, and that's more present for you. You know that other people are listening to the conversation right now and paying a differing level of attention. And the way it works for me, like I've got lots of musician friends and DJ friends, and they help me analyze the music that's playing. And there's all sorts of technical words like, oh, did you hear the compression on those drums? Or, oh, did you hear that high pass filter? And if you're listening to a song, you can tell when the voice goes all distant and faint sounding that they cut out all the low bass notes. And there's a sound effect that gets used in music all the time to make you sound tinny like you're on a telephone, right? And you understand how the technology works, and you hear the presence of the process of the technology in the song. And now you're not just dancing to a song, you're also seeing or visualizing the technology, like, oh, here's how the audio engineer did that. Oh, here's that effect they used. That mixes is bad. Man, they should have added more bass on that, whatever, right? Learning to dismantle our content world by seeing how it's made is something we're very good at with film. Film's 100 years old, and I
Yeah.
think lots of people who watch movies pride themselves on their ability to see what a director is doing. We do
Right.
that with film now. It's taken us a long time to learn how to take apart a film, to be like, oh, that was a good shot. You think 100 years ago people were appreciating the cinematography? Like, no, they weren't. There were no film geeks talking about film learn stuff, studying film, right? That's what the second, third generation of movie directors were the hardcore fanatics who were sitting around watching, D.W. Griffith films or watching Orson Welles films or watching, Alfred Hitchcock films and studying them in a way that no one else was studying them. And then they went to make movies, and then we're learning from them. And now we're all learning how shows are written, and we're all wondering why Game of Thrones is, is why they made these changes from the book, or all these other conversations that fans have in their fan cultures about TV shows and about video games. They've got great technical literacy behind the arts in a sense that no one knew a couple decades ago. The thing is, the technology's moved on. There's other things that you could technologically learn about. There's computers. Most people don't know how their computers work, right? And 100 years from now, we'll all be talking about like experts about how computers work today. How one hopes, that none of us are capable of speaking about now because pop culture hasn't caught up.
Yeah.
That's another entryway into embodiments for me because when I know how the room that I'm in exists as a
How
physical
can
thing.
you, but if you keep, but the average person might think, well, how can, that's like, do I want to analyze when I'm watching a movie? I might even be interested in how it's made, but I don't want to watch every movie with that filter on as my primary filter. Why
Right.
can't I just listen to this podcast right now? Or, I thought of the novel thing you said about the reality of what I'm doing, the copper and magnetism
Yeah.
and the approximation to our voices,
Yeah.
but I can't keep that on every time. And if I did, I wouldn't enjoy learning about who really runs the world and which war
Hmm.
is going to start next and all the things that are really pressing because they're
Hmm.
going to deal with. And I understand that that's not necessarily true, but I'm just saying, how would you work
True.
through those concerns?
Well, there's a few ways into that. Marathon runners aren't aficionados for shoe tying. They don't love tying shoes. They aren't learning six different ways to lace up their shoes. Hockey players, especially, they're not right. They're not geeks about shoelaces,
Mm-hmm.
but they need to learn how to tie their shoes to play
Yeah,
their sport properly, or they're
yeah,
gonna break an ankle.
yeah.
you know, like there are some things you need to learn because it's part of learning how a thing works. And yes, I used to listen to music all the time on my tape player with these cheap ear headphones as a kid, and I loved the songs. And then eventually, you're trying to listen to Pink Floyd on your tape player, and you're like, "This sounds like garbage." And you realize, "Oh, I've been using horrible equipment. I need to get good headphones." And yeah, you can't enjoy, the thing you're listening to anymore because the medium got in the way. Absolutely, right? Yes, if the thing is, if you never have that experience and you're always just in the content all the time, you could be, denying yourself an ability to touch ground and have an immediate relation with your world. And if you are having, issues staying in touch with the ground of reality, then focusing on the ground of reality might be a good distraction or something to keep you occupied while you work on yourself.
Is it your belief that all the wars and usury, the debt that people are in,
Mhm.
the lack of ability to find meaningful uh, wages that can keep up with the rate of home costs, housing costs, people are concerned about all these different things like crime and all that. But let's just say, in general, right now, we are closer to nuclear war than ever, we are told. Now, that could just be a media narrative. I haven't been to Ukraine myself.
Uh-huh.
It could be just a big staged event. I'm just being facetious there for a second,
Yeah,
but the
yeah,
point
well,
is, I haven't been there. I've only been mediated the story, but it looks like when we're doing things in this way with this, that we could be in a nuclear hypersonic missile.
yeah. The
Uh,
the 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 end goal of what I'm saying, if you were to take it, as a total way of being, is flat eartherism. It's I don't believe anything exists beyond the horizon of where I'm at right now. Hey, I'm totally embodied because here I am standing on this square mile.
Right.
And whatever's outside of this that I'm only getting through immediate image, who knows if it exists? Who's going, right? Like, I don't know. The earth could be flat. There could be round. I don't believe anything I see on the screen. I don't
Right.
believe anything I hear. I don't believe anything, right? And I mean, what's his name? Christopher Columbus comes back and says that he saw unicorns in the New World, right? You know, oh come on, really? And then it turns out it was a rhinoceros, let's say, right? Explorers from distant lands. We grew up our entire life. The guy who was on a trade boat for 2 years and comes back and tells wild, fanciful stories of things that no one has ever seen, right? These enchanting tales, right? Of voyagers, right? Of travelers who return home, right? That's been the currency of human existence, and the last couple centuries of knowing what's going on the whole planet, or thinking you know what's going on the whole planet, and being able to do things on a planetary scale. I mean, as soon as we got the telegraph, um, Florence Nightingale busted her ass to Ukraine as we and to the Crimean Peninsula, and started raising shit about how terrible the soldiers were being treated and how awful the hospitals were, and found modern nursing as a profession. Right? She changed the world. She created an entire class of people who took care of people who weren't doctors, but also weren't prostitutes like they
Yeah.
had been. Right? Right. So like we've lived in this very short historical window where we've touched the whole world. And yeah, what AI does, and what there's that great movie Waking Life, sort of rotoscoped, that sort of deals with that sensational am I awake or am I dreaming right now thing. And I've had moments like that, and I hope not to very often, and when they're induced I find them highly disorienting. And being in touch with the room you're in and knowing who you're with is a great help to losing yourself in those sort of questions, which take you away from the important parts of living. I'm not a geopolitics expert. I don't know what's happening in Ukraine. I can't. I read The Economist for years when I worked in a magazine store, and it was there, and I read it, and I learned a lot about what I don't know about global economics, and I learned lots of names of lots of very famous people, right? But if you ask me what my opinion was, it wouldn't be my own. I'd be telling you something smart that I heard some economist say on some forgotten TV show, I'm
People should have that. I think people should, in general, have that humility about what the things they say are. I think
Mhm,
it would just. I think it would take a lot longer to get out their point, though, if they said, "Now, I'm not saying this is what I said, but this is what I heard," because and we all want to be the originator. That's
mhm,
what Rene Girard talks about. The true individualist is the one most mimetically enclosed, because they're not aware of how much of what they are doing. If they really truly believe that everything came from them, they're really lost in a true sense of the word. Um, but I'm getting at, here's what I think you're right. You can't get too caught up in that um, kind of distrust of media. But at the same time, I'm saying also, and what the question I was asking is like, are these wars and these things product of the way in which we have evolved technology? Because you said all these different technologies are media.
mhm.
That's the running premise of my show. I'm asking you to test if my premise could be correct. The premise, one of the premise points of my program that I keep harking back to, is this idea of saying, okay, um, we live, to use the Peter Thiel analogy, we haven't innovated in the world of atoms since the 1960s, and
Mhm.
all we've done is innovate in the world of bits. Right? That's one of his famous lines. That
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
on our iPhone while we're living in these disrepaired subway systems that people today couldn't develop. You look at
yeah,
the Golden Gate Bridge. It was built this a certain amount of time. We wouldn't be able to do that today.
yeah,
Like there's something scary, and Darren Beatty at Revolver News makes the point that there's something terrifying about a nation that is more interested in believing that the moon landing was faked, rather than to believe that that was real. Because what does that say about a society that's far advanced but yet doesn't know how to get back there without having
yeah.
tremendous
Techn
problems?
Technology cuts to the heart of it, and
Yeah,
there's a great series of essays called "Simulation and Its Discontents."
yeah,
authored by Sherry Turkle, who's a professor at MIT for a long time, and also studied like Lacanian psychoanalysis and stuff too. But she makes the point of doing the groundwork of examining architects and going to architectural offices in the 80s as computers are being brought in for CAD work, right? Computer assisted design. And so buildings are getting designed on computers now. And you don't have to pull out the drafting table with your pencil and your ruler and do the math and then pull out your inkwell and begin drawing your blueprints as has been true. And when you're having the computer do all the math for you when you're going through 3D models on the computer and working just through the simulation, right? Your sense to your building is completely different. And architects who had grown up using pencil and paper and math felt like they were owning the building. They were creating it. They did the work of building the building on paper first, and here it is, and now we're building it. And they would walk around the site where the building was going to go, and they were visualizing how's it going to fit in here, right? And a lot of architectural work today can be done by someone who learns how the software works and is an engineer and understands the engineering of building, a safe building that will stand, right? And understands the history of aesthetics, but otherwise it's basically building Lego blocks because the computer does all the math for them, right? It does all the calculations, right? The computer doing it, and they're just kind of guiding the computer through making it work. And so that knowledge exists materially in the computer and in the software, not in them, in a way that they practice all the time through enacting their craft, like a a craftsman usually does or has done historically. Yeah, the everything we do can be made more efficient for the sake of being turned into a system that then goes into a book of instructions that then anybody can follow that book without understanding the instructions.
Yeah.
That does sometimes feel like a one-directional process. More and more and more of our stuff becomes mechanized and becomes rote and formulaic. That's why we are losing knowledge about how to do things we used to be able to do. The people
I think like for example, our physics field of theory, our physics theories have been enshrined because of the trauma and what happened with World War II, right? And this idea of like the world destroying power of the atom bomb, whatever theories were kind of given credit for developing that, were enshrined in a holy of holies status of knowledge that was not allowed to be questioned without great cultural and career risk and social pariah status. So you kind of had to like let go of that. And Thomas Kuhn talks about this idea that, of course, with paradigm shifts, they don't happen because people are just going into the field and say, you know what, I'm going to challenge relativity. You don't do that. Okay. You just don't. I'm going to go back to the foundations of what established quantum. We're going to challenge the double slit experiment. And one day I'll be the chair of my department. That's never going to happen in this current system. So like you can't challenge these things, not necessarily because the lack of that, like it's just exhaustive evidence, but the mimetic, right? The mimetic peer pressure that is calcified through the generations of like, these are religious figures. This is like saying, I'm going to challenge Moses and the 10 Commandments right now or something, at the period in which that was considered to be something you couldn't challenge. And so my point is that I call it the Mowgli effect, is that whoever could control the fire to, like Mowgli from the Jungle Book, he could control the fire. He controlled the whole jungle. Everything shut down. The tiger was about to kill him. And then he said, look, I can control this fire. And they're like, hey, nobody else can do that. And so everybody kind of shut down and submitted in this kind of thing. And I think that's what happened with physics in World War II and the trauma and everything involved with that whole conflict. People were like, okay, we're putting these earth destroying field of knowledge into a don't touch with safety glass. And so what happened is that, and then quantum comes out and it's all about idea in the mind. And so everything goes into computers. So all innovation has been like, derivations of the mind and kind of like ideation. But we don't believe that anything is left to be discovered in the physical world. So I believe we have to have the courage to do things and to do experimentation that are right under our nose that may not cost hardly anything.
Mm-hmm.
That would disprove the scientific established dogmas to show that the world is actually just as wild and loose as one could even imagine. That we're still in the dark frontier world of what's real in this.
Yeah. If people start, doing things, and they didn't go pay money for a course on how to do that thing, then they're gonna look like, if it's impressive what they're doing, they're gonna look like, miracle workers. Right? If because everything is bought into, that you would want to do, or rather, someone is selling you a 5 easy steps to become this thing that you want to be, and we're taught to negotiate our world through buying a lifestyle or buying a course or a master course or something like this to become all the things that we're supposed to want to become and to do all the things we're supposed to want to do. People go off on their own and find their own thing that no one else has ever heard before. Like there's this great early '90s band called Slint. That was just a bunch of young men who hung out, in one of their friends' basements in rural America, just jamming on the guitars and the guy on the drums for years, just coming up with their own style that no one ever freaking heard before. And as soon as they got a record label and I was listening, I go, "What the hell is? I've never heard any weird, trancy, droning sort of style of guitar that would like immediately afterwards grunge music became a thing, and Nirvana got huge." And like, I'm certain that there was some sort of like influence of like this weird thing no one ever heard before came out of, it might as well fallen out of the sky. And it's like, what the hell is this sound, right? And it's because it could just grow off unexamined in a basement, in a cornfield somewhere for years before it finally burst out, right?
Yeah, that's such a good analogy to what I'm saying. Is that there's such a here we go, the words contamination of mimetic blindness to things that are right under our nose. Like I was with, I mean, people who have, I was investigating elemental transmutation at room temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of people who are interested in this are usually like 80 and up. 85 is the youngest. And it shows you they grew up in a, what's that?
I mean, alchemy, yeah.
Yeah, well, they grew up in an era where you could still believe in flying cars and going to outer planets. You see what I mean? So they're still a product of the programming in which they were in, which is still that the world is still a frontier, that we can find new things. But that closed out. And in my generation, I can't find anybody that wants to do elemental transmutation experiment because anybody who's an idea guy is too busy making an app or a Substack or something like that. And so they're in the world of ideas and because they've been told that don't question, relativity or quantum or string theory, all these different like rarefied things because you must have mathematical equations. So it's like this high priestly, stay away. Do you know these equations? And they throw equations and you say, oh, wow, dear God, don't touch anything in my garage. I can't possibly come up with anything that would defy those math equations.
Yes.
All the dinner parties you've had with Epstein, my God, how many equations did you come up with? But anyways, because I'm putting a reference there to show that there's a lot of political stuff behind what goes on with what's considered to be rarefied, untouchable, established science. That's politics. But my point is that you first have to have the ability to believe that the world is left unsettled still. Like there's so much right under your nose that you don't have to have $1 billion reactor to find out, and you don't have to have.
Absolutely. The idea of, consensus building as a foundation, is I guess there's not much consensus about a great many things anymore, and that number's only dwindling, and so maybe it's a foregone point.
But the reason why though is because the things that are not,
we don't want frontiers that exist because we forgot knowledge. We want new frontiers, right? So we don't want to go back to the past I mean, everyone I hope this isn't too callous, right? It's heartwarming to hear about a person, let's say, who lost, who was in a car crash and became paralyzed and then went through therapy and then learned to walk again.
Yeah.
right? It's a wonderful achievement, but we don't want to, keep ourselves busy by literally first losing faculties that we didn't have to lose in the first place.
Yeah.
And learning those faculties, doing the patient, boring work of becoming an expert in something. And maybe it sounds like I'm contradicting my last point, but you're not going to beat the priests in the lab coats with the chalkboard full of scientific equations if you're not studying math. And you can do it on your own. Libraries are free. The only expenditure is your time and energy. That's the only and the sacrifice of not spending your time some other sense.
I
Right?
agree with the math thing, but I'm saying even be bold enough to believe that maybe the physical world should be first observed before you have to make an equation.
Mm-hmm.
To trust your senses. I'm being more McLuhan than maybe
Yes,
you are at this point. Because
certainly.
I'm saying cook. I'm saying do some cooking, cook
Uh-huh.
some stuff. Get your hands dirty, make elemental transmutation. Try to see if you can use magnetic fields to take trash and turn it into gold. Because if you do, you've done something that your eyes can then test and you can examine to see was there gold in the material before and now is there gold now. I don't need a darn equation to show that. See what I mean? And that's the point. That kind of frontier spirit, we've been told don't challenge that because you have to have this impenetrable wall of special knowledge to even begin to try to do something. Basically, mathematics has taken over engineering, and engineering needs to take its rightful place. The theoretical physicists always take credit for the things that engineers were doing in the dark, and the theoretical physicists come in later and say, "Oh, I have a mathematical equation to explain what was going on there," and the engineer gets kind of on a lower pecking order, gets pushed aside, and oh,
Mm-hmm.
you discovered it in the dark, and I came up with a narrative. I had a better PR, right? My PR narrative as to what happened is why I get the credit of my theory is with this technology when it's actually engineers doing it. And so we
Mm-hmm.
need those engineers, those frontiers to be discovered by engineers who will push through every sacred cow of what's settled to be considered to be settled science. Because I think here's my point. I think if we do that, I can imagine a world where we have anti-gravity, where we have all these different beautiful things, and we will have a more incarnate world. I believe that we're lost in this disincarnate world because we've been convinced that the material world is a lost cause on so many levels. Like
Mm-hmm.
whatever was to be determined, we figured it out. There's nothing more exciting. There are no more wonderful miracles.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Planet's going to die anyways if we don't, we do anything innovative. So let's not, everything about innovation in the world of physics has been considered to be like probably going to destroy the planet worse. So we don't believe in ourselves anymore. We don't have confidence in ourselves. Right? We
Mm-hmm.
don't believe in building things and making things and any of that.
It seems like it's always two extremes, and conversations where it's two horrible choices. Generally it's because people don't understand what they're talking about, right? But it's either, oh, renegade nut job scientist acts too soon and does horrible thing, is the counter argument, like, oh, let's just try this zany experiment and see what happens. And that's the criticism you hear of, like, like um these Silicon Valley libertarian
Right.
ideology is often criticized as being like overgrown boys breaking things in civilization to learn how it works and then promising to fix it
Right.
later, right?
Right.
So it's like when we reduce these things to political categories, the conversations get so tribal that we end up demonizing in that aspect this sort of creativity you need. But I mean, if you're not, like you said, working at the small scale right in front of your face, in the garden, in the kitchen, sure, in your basement laboratory.
I would challenge you even on I'm not you, but just the whole premise. Again, we're lost. I'm building on your
Yeah,
thesis. Basically, I'm saying
yeah,
I'm supporting your thesis. I'm saying, like,
yeah,
look at what Silicon Valley. That's all disincarnate. Okay,
totally.
they're nothing. There's nothing incarnated about what they're doing there. Sitting on
No.
a computer all day, coming up with an app to feed the world. Okay, whatever. I mean, I'm talking about getting in a microwave, not yourself, but put your head in the microwave and put that material together inside the microwave, close the door and hit power and use a Target microwave or Walmart or whatever. Buy a microwave and put something in it. Don't do it around children. Do it so you
Yeah,
use some safety, but
yeah.
actually like do stuff. Like I
Do
don't want to hear about another app. That's
uh
apps will come along later to take credit for what the people in the microwave experiments
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
We don't care. Those are always going to be loudmouths that want to take credit for everything and have good slick PR campaigns to make money. But
hmm
people who really want to do something that would change the world have to use incarnational
They
things right
do.
in front of their face.
So the way to incarnate in a world full of computers, I think, is to work from the bottom up. And so build a kit computer, a simple one. Go learn how the transistors work. Go learn, right? Go make one of those computers that's a bunch of blinky lights and switches where you're doing 1 0 1 1 1 1 with the switches and reading it off the lights. And that computer will be a real physical object that you understand. That's what kit computers were in the 70s. That's what Bill Gates bought in 1976 to go make a basic program for that he sold and made Microsoft big and rich. Was on a computer called the Altair that had a rows of little blinky lights and a whole bunch of switches go click, 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 click. That's embodied computing, and that's where it's closest to electrical engineering. And electrical engineering is the ground of all the marvelous technologies we've had, for over 150 years. And understanding electronics is also right. Signal processing
Yeah.
and filters. That's where if you study music today, and you understand audio engineering and filters, then what you're studying is the grounds of an electronic engineering degree. And you don't have to you can slowly learn more and more things and start thinking about your knowledge not as music mixing knowledge. Yes, today, you're making EDM or you're on a dance floor, but like 10 years from now, you could be designing components, right? Right? Like all of our technologies are interrelated, and the ground of this discarnate content world is the underlying technology behind it. And
Right.
we all know more than we think we do. We sell ourselves short.
Yeah.
We can understand frequencies and waves and bits and bytes. It's not so hard as we let ourselves down to do. And fortunately, I had a dad who fixed cars all day and got
That's
his hands dirty and sold them for spare parts. And I fixed everyone's computer and had a screwdriver and I took my computer apart. It's a physical object to me first before it's a little shiny black box Plato's cave window into imagination land like it is for so
so you
many
had to
other
tame
people.
it. You had to
I had
tame
to
that
tame it.
horse. Yeah.
I had to fix it. If I broke it, holy shit, I had to fix it or I was in trouble. I know there was pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so understanding these things at a low level. I mean, when
Well,
you're cracking a good joke about the microwave, but it's a perfectly good point. It's a completely valid point. Doing these embodied, incarnated activities with our technology. Yes, go get dirty, go break your computer and try to fix it again. Take it apart. What you're going to want to do is get an old computer and install some old operating system on it from the 80s and go see how it's different from your iPhone. If you're 12 years old, and you never used an old computer, that's the problem today. These
yeah.
kids, they've never even sat down with a mouse and clicked around on things and saved a file in a folder somewhere. Like
Or had to
teachers,
wait once a week to catch episode 2 of their favorite cartoon, you
oh,
know?
yeah, yes, yes. And behind all that, like try getting your computer to hook up to your TV so you can go watch episode 2. It's,
What what would Marshall McLuhan say if we had anti-gravity technology developed and everybody could have an anti-gravity floating thing instead of having to have a combustion engine and drive down roads to see grandma? You could get on a beautiful, elegant anti-gravity device that
Mhm.
just gently floats even faster.
He
And you
predicted
wouldn't have to have
anti-gravity.
wars for oil, and you wouldn't have to have tires changed every few months or oil changed. You would just float in a very gentle, no need to have airplanes with packed in like sardines because of the cost of fuel and all that. You could just float very gently using magnetism. What would he think about that? How would
He
he?
Oh, he thought it. He thought it. He predicted it. He thought it was right around the corner.
Oh,
He
really?
thought he thought that the media effects of all of us losing touch with the ground immediately signified that science must be on the verge directly of discovering an actual analog to match our perception.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
That's
He
so
thought
cool.
He thought that technology was always just around the corner to instantiate the thing that artists were noticing. For
Interesting.
instance,
Yeah.
yeah,
So he thought,
television television is a series of dots. And so he saw the French painter Seurat, who does
yeah,
that painting of the park made of all the dots and the women with the parasol and the
yeah,
beach, right? Right. He's like, the artists saw television coming before television even came because the artists are always ahead of the curve. So when artists start showing us that we're leaving the ground and we're floating off into space, and when David Bowie is saying ground control to Major Tom, where are you going, and all the
yeah,
kids are tripping into the cosmos, of course anti-gravity must be right around the corner.
yeah.
Duh.
So would he see that as a negative thing? It's going to make our nuclear family even smaller because now you can float gently without any chemicals or carbon pollution, and you can float gently away across the United States in, let's say, 30
Mhm.
minutes as opposed to 4 hours. Now we're going to be even more disintegrated as a family. Is that the kind of McLuhan angle he would
Yeah.
take, or would he be more positive or neutral, or how would he?
Oh, he always tried to be neutral in his
Yeah,
public
yeah,
performances and his public works.
yeah,
Privately, it would have scared the shit out of him. But
yeah,
that it takes courage is knowing what to do and how to act and staying strong in the face of change and in the face of the new, and doing the best you can to be who you need to be for yourself, for your family, and for society by being strong, being capable, being mature, tying
yeah,
up the loose ends of your past, and carrying the weight that you can do responsibly, right? So that's what he was trying to do. He would have put on a brave face and said, "Yes, it's coming, and there will be services and disservices, and soon we'll all be floating around, ripped away from this, and we'll need to make new families of the friends we meet along the way, and become role players, and right." But yeah, it's never not worrying.
Well, did he ever talk about, or how did he frame scarcity in technology and extensions of man?
Oh, well, he saw American consumer capitalism as the best example of communism ever. Way better than the Soviets. American capitalism is a way better communism than the Soviets were ever doing because there was so much junk everywhere and everyone had one of everything. And even the poorest people had a television and a refrigerator and running water and
Yeah,
all these things all over the place. And then we are now getting attached to infinitely reproducible, non-real commodity things, right? Like television shows, right? You only shoot it once. You can air it a million times, right? It's infinitely reproducible. So we were living in a world of massive excess where everyone could have whatever they wanted, far beyond you know what the Soviets had or
right,
could offer, right?
right,
So he's like, why is America against communism? It's the most communist country there, and it's kind of a rhetorical point. He's like taking a jab, right? But no, he saw the abundance, but we tend to squander it a lot, and we tend to ignore it. And a lot of advertising is making you feel, through some psychological trick that you need to buy a new thing, and with computers especially, you need to go buy the new thing. Like we were talking about earlier. Where's the company with the bravery to kill off its own business model by building a product no one will need to buy again, right?
yeah. Or not be in debt to buy. That'd be a nice thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Clint, I really appreciate your time, and it's always great talking with you. And you did a really good job with this article. I think it's just different to read, McLuhan, media ecology and the constant internet chatter. You don't hear it as much, so you do a great job of carrying on that discourse. So
Thank
check
you
it
so
out.
much, David. I'll
De-
keep it up.
defaultfriend.substack.com. Any other website where people might want to go?
Yeah, my website is concernednetizen.com. So
Concernednetizen.com.
that's like citizen, but netizen. Yeah, and you'll find lots of writings and other links there.
All right. Thank you.